think we switched that. It's just.
That's for another day, right?
There you are. One whole day, that's all.
I did go for a massage yesterday.
Uh-huh,
Did I
that
tell
helped,
you?
yeah, did that help?
Yes, yeah. I think it's just a matter of time, huh?
Uh-huh,
Yeah, do I just have to give us some time, you think?
yeah,
Yeah?
is it doing, like spasms?
Yes,
Muscle relaxers.
muscle relaxers.
Yeah, I'll scan it.
I did this to myself. Alright.
I don't want.
Wait till you get older.
I always.
Mhm.
Alrighty.
It was a laptop probably.
Now, do you know why I didn't answer the phone that night?
My gosh, yes. Yes, we forgive you, Vicky. We'll let all of it pass.
Okay. Absolutely. Yeah, I'll scan that in, send it over to you by the end of the day tomorrow. And if you have any questions or anything, feel free to shoot me an email or we can go through it, on your first day, whatever works. Probably. Yeah, that's fine.
Kind of a chair snob.
I have,
Oh, what's going on?
I hadn't heard that Julia Wolf.
like 3-1.
Yeah.
Good, how are you? I know. It was super hot.
It was pretty warm. I got it.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah.
And a few
Do you
days
feel
ago,
like
so
it's been a
windy, but it
while
was
since
so
we haven't
hot.
been here?
I know.
No.
No?
Oh, no.
That excuses him.
It's gonna just be cold on us one day.
I forgot you're the one that excuses
It's gonna
him.
change all of a
All
sudden.
of a sudden.
It's always like towards the end of September.
It will be.
Like, why didn't it not last that nice? I could throw myself a party.
Right?
Right? It's like always like on our days, like the most lenient.
Yeah. Like it's nice, 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 and it
Right
doesn't
on.
start-
No mames, mira.
Yeah, that's why I never.
All right, everybody, welcome to tonight's study session for Monday, September 9, 2024. For the record, all members of staff are here with the exception of Fire Chief Holbrook, which has been excused by the manager, Counselor Hart. We can give her an opportunity to get here, and we'll see again where she is at the end of the meeting. Please remind me at the end of the meeting to ask if she's not here yet, if she gets an excused absence. All right, so welcome everyone. We've got a couple of items on our study session. The first one is the proclamation. We've got two proclamations tonight that are proposed for this evening. The first one for Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. And we're being asked to approve a resolution proclaiming September as Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. Council, questions or comments on this item?
I see that this was presented by a member of the public. Are they here to receive a copy of, maybe you could?
They will be at 6:30. It's the family of Hillel, I think is how you pronounce it. So it was her mother that requested this proclamation. She provided the draft. And like I said, she confirmed she'll be here at 6:30.
Okay, perfect. And so I have the proclamation. Council, would you like me to read any of the letter that she has submitted? I don't have that. I just have the proclamation in front of me, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I can read it off the screen if necessary.
Yeah, you can
But-
do that.
Okay. We'll do that. So I see no objection to that, so we can move on to the next item then. Sunshine Days proclamation. Sunshine Days coming up this weekend. Approve a resolution proclaiming September 14 and 15, 2024 as Sunshine Days in the city of Sunnyside. Comments on this item?
No, I'm just moving my microphone. I don't have a comment.
No other comments other than it's a event we're all looking forward to and hope that we all have a great deal of fun and enjoyment. And I know they're getting ready for the new Royal Court. Seems like that goes really fast. It seems like it was just a few minutes ago that we were welcoming in the new court and now they're on their way out. It seems like that's that way every single year. All right, so there's no objection to the proclamation, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
My understanding that the parade is in the evening this time around.
So, yeah, that's the case? Yeah. All right, for the record, Counselor Hart has arrived. All right, the next item, and this is the big one, 2024 Water System Plan. And it says on the agenda, approve a resolution adopting the 2024 Water System Plan. That needs to be amended because there's another process, another step that goes before that. So the motion needs to be amended to authorize staff to submit this water system plan to the Department of Health. Once that comes back from the Department of Health, then we will submit, we will again have to pass another resolution to approve it. So there's the whole process that we have to go through. So tonight's motion is just to submit the plan to the Department of Health. Questions or comments on this? I know we have members of HLA here to be able to answer questions. Ms. Well, do you want to hear the presentation first? Okay, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. As you mentioned, HLA is here and this system water plan is something our Public Works Director, Raul Sanchez, has been working very closely with the team from HLA. So now's a good time to tee it up for the regular meeting. So I know Stephanie, you guys want to step up to the mic, and I know you have presented before, but sort of pick up where we left off. So thank you guys.
Hi, my name is Rob Scott. I worked on this plan primarily for the city. Thank you for having me here today. So would you like to go through the presentation before the public meeting? Before the
Rob, I think that would be a good modus operandi, just as a warm up and I think to tee up any questions that we might have.
I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. So I took the presentation from a couple weeks ago and I streamlined it a little bit and then added the water use efficiency part at the end that needs to be discussed in the public hearing tonight. So as a reminder, the water system plan is a document that gets updated every 10 years. It's required for the city to stay in compliance for their water system with the Department of Health. And a critical piece is that you need to have an approved and current water system plan to be eligible for funding programs. The Drinking Water State Revolving Fund program through Department of Health is one of the primary mechanisms that public systems like yourself get funding to be able to complete capital projects. So the first draft of this plan was submitted back in November 2023, and we returned, Department of Health got comments back to us in June. So we went through those comments with city staff and got some clarification from Department of Health. And we're now ready to resubmit the plan back to them. As you alluded to earlier, once Department of Health approves what's been submitted to them, at that point, they'll basically send us something that says, please have the city adopt the plan. And then once you've adopted it, we send proof of that to them and then you receive your approval. And the purpose for that is so that if you were to adopt it now and they were to have comments, then we would have to change it and you'd have to re-adopt the updated plan. So they just ask that that be done once. So the planning projections for the plan are a population growth of 2% moving forward. And so that takes you from a population of a little over 17,000 up to close to 26,000 by the year 2043. And the assumption at this point is that your water demand will increase proportionally to that population growth. So the major water system components in your system are your wells that pump the water into the system, the treatment to add chlorine in your case to the water in low doses to be able to disinfect the water and make it suitable for public use. There are reservoirs that store the water, your booster stations and pressure reducing valves that allow water to be served to higher elevations in your system, the distribution pipes in the road that move water around your system for people to use, and then water rights, which are not a physical aspect, they're the legal right for the city to withdraw water from the ground. Next slide. And so this here is a couple of figures from the plan that basically what we're showing here is on the bottom right corner of that slide, you have all your wells, which is how your water is getting into your system. And then as you move up and to the left, water is pumped up into those, what's called your Grandview reservoirs. And then it can use gravity to pressurize the system and serve everything in zone 1. Everything in zones 2 and 3, which are up on the hill and higher elevations, the water is repumped from your reservoirs through the booster station to your Skyline Reservoir, where it can then serve those higher elevations. And in the case of a situation where you don't have enough water in your lower zone because of a fire or something like that, the pressure reducing valves allow the water to flow out of the elevated zone back down into the lower zone. And so that's sort of a schematic of how the system works and then where those items are located within the city. Next slide. So the city has 8 groundwater wells numbered 6 through 13. You have a total capacity of 6,500 gallons per minute. It's that well 10 is an emergency source that's 1,000 gallons a minute that isn't used. So in theory, you have access to about 5,500 gallons per minute that you can pump. Right now, your wells 6 and 7 need to be rehabilitated. So those are, the city chooses to not use those because of aesthetic and operating concerns. If you needed to, you could operate them, but the city does get complaints about water quality when you do that. So when you're not using your well 6, 7, and 10, you have the ability to pump about 3,750 gallons per minute in your system. Your maximum day demand, the hottest days of the summer, high irrigation use is over 5,000 gallons per day. So over the course of a day, you draw down your storage about 50%. And so when you can turn 6 and 7 on to help alleviate that problem. But those are the situations that the city starts having complaints about and would like to alleviate with capital projects that are suggested in this plan. The treatment, wells 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, and 13 use chlorine gas cylinders to add the chlorine to the water. Sodium hypochlorite is used in wells 10 and 11. 12 and 13 used to have sodium hypochlorite, but earlier this year, your system was modified, and so they have chlorine gas now. The storage, the reservoirs, so your Grandview reservoirs are a series of 3 tanks that are partially buried that serve most of your water system. And then the Skyline Reservoir serves zones 2 and 3. Right now, you're at the limit of DOH reliability, Department of Health reliability storage for your population. And so the reliability calculations they require is that you need to make all of this all the calculations in the plan under the assumption that your largest well is not functioning to basically to be safe. So that if you were ever to have a well go down, or in your case, if you have wells that you're choosing to not use for aesthetic reasons and operations concerns, you don't run out of water and you have enough storage. And so right now you're right at the limit of those calculations, which is one of the reasons why a new reservoir is recommended to be added to the system south of I-82. The existing booster station is located at your Grandview Reservoir site. And as I said before, it transfers water from the zone 1 from that Grandview Reservoir up to the Skyline Reservoir to serve zones 2 and 3. And that booster station is working well just because of the age of the pumps in it. It's recommended that those pumps start to get replaced within the next 10 years. And then the distribution system, the pipes themselves, you have about 75 miles of pipeline. Like the city, when pipes or when leaks are identified, the city staff perform maintenance to repair breaks. They have water lines get replaced over time. Like when you're doing a road project, typically you'll replace water lines under that road so that you don't have to cut into that road later to do work on those water lines. And there are some areas of the system that as the city grows, the ability to provide enough service pressure and enough fire suppression storage and enough fire flow starts to decrease as more and more water is pushed through. You start to get lower pressure. And so there are areas of the system where it's recommended that you start to loop those pipes and you start to upsize pipes to maintain good service pressure. And the city's water rights, you have a series of 8 permits, claims, and certificates that collectively allow you to withdraw up to 5,044 acre feet per year. In the water rights world, acre feet is how they identify storage or a volume of water and it's up for debate at this point exactly how much you're allowed to withdraw instantaneously. In previous plans that you had more than 5,020 gallons per minute identified. When we first submitted this plan back in November, Department of Ecology claimed that your number was lower. So we did the calculations under the assumption that you only have access to that 5,020 gallons per minute. However, we're working on a letter to dispute that claim, and we think there's pretty good chance that it will be upheld to what we both thought the number and what the previous plan thought it was. As far as operating your system now is concerned, even if you were only allowed to pump 5,000 gallons per minute, with the wells you're operating now, you can meet your demands. However, it's an operations issue. You'd like to be able to have access to all your wells when you want them. And legally speaking, you wouldn't be able to operate them all if you were capped at 5,020 gallons per minute. So you are okay for the next 10 years. However, you will need additional water rights by the end of 20 years because of the acre feet number, your annual amount of pumping. And that's the part of water rights that typically costs money. Instantaneous rights are not necessarily as hard to come by. It's the acre feet that tends to be expensive to procure. So at this point, the city's immediate priorities are rehabilitation of wells 6 and 7 so they can be brought online if and when the city needs to use them. Even beyond that, because of those Department of Health reliability standards, we would recommend that you drill an additional well soon and then also construct a new reservoir, again, because of those Department of Health reliability concerns. Beyond those immediate capital projects, there are ongoing priorities that all systems face, including yours, which is addressing older and leaking water mains, looping water mains for pressure, replacing smaller diameter pipes, and then in general, as your system continues to grow, to make the pipeline improvements to serve those new developments. So the project financing at this point, Department of Health requires in our water system plan that when we identify all of these projects, that we identify what the city's rate structure and financing could potentially look like. It's critical that even when we make rate recommendations in the plan, approving the plan doesn't mean those rate recommendations are necessarily going to be implemented. What it means is that the city identifies how you could solve these problems and when you would do these projects. But on an ongoing basis from year to year, you would still go through your same budgeting projects to identify what your rate increases, if any, would need to be. And so for the three projects that are sort of grouped together are the new well and well rehabilitation that we would identify, having the city perform ideally starting next year. There's a $6.4 million number identified for all of that work. The new reservoir project and transmission main to get to that reservoir site, and then water main work later into the 10-year planning period. Collectively, all of those are identified as DWSRF funding loans at 20 years, 1.75% interest rate, which is typically what the Department of Health program offers. And so the corresponding debt service for that is identified. There are other projects identified throughout the plan that's the assumptions that those are smaller projects that the city could fit in throughout the planning period. And so those are not identified specifically as loan applications, but performed using city reserves. Next slide. So the rate impact to bringing on approximately $1.2 million per year of loans over the next 10 years is an approximate increase of your single-family residential water rate from $36.19 on average per month to $78.11 by the end of the 10-year planning period. So to get from point A to point B, that can be done in many different ways, based on when the city wants to do the programs and what kinds of reserves you want to be holding through that period. However, that's basically where we're looking at right now, and other funding could potentially be identified. But as I mentioned before, for potable water systems, the DWSRF loan program is the primary system that gets used, although there are other options that may or may not be relevant to some of these projects that are identified in the plan, including Community Development Block Grant, Public Works Trust Fund, and a few others. State legislative appropriations are also another avenue that some communities have successfully used to get projects done. So the schedule for this, so we prepared the final draft back in August of 2024 when we did our first presentation. There are a few minor changes that have been made to the plan that will be implemented before it goes to Department of Health. There is some additional information that we're collecting from city staff. And then also the public hearing today, any comments that we receive from the public that need to be implemented into the plan, those changes will also be made before we submit to Department of Health within the next couple of months. The assumption at this point from talking to Department of Health is that we would receive an approval back from them in November, which would allow you to be eligible to then have an approved plan and be able to apply to DWSRF, Department of Health's program, this November if you so choose. The city would adopt the plan after DOH gives us the approval to do so. And then there are other DWSRF applications identified later in the plan after this year, depending on how the city's what your demands look like, whether you need to do a project 5 years from now, 7 years from now, whenever that ends up being. But those additional DWSRF applications are also identified here. So the water use efficiency is something that we did not talk about at the last meeting. This is the information that needs to be discussed in public hearing per Department of Health regulations. So just to take a step back, water use efficiency is something that Department of Health implemented, I want to say about 15 years ago. There was some big changes with the municipal water law, which identifies for people who deal with the water rights world. Most people, if you're a business and you have water rights, like if you're an industry, if you're a farm, you're only allowed to pull a certain amount out of the ground. But if you only use part of your water right, after a certain amount of time, it's eligible for what's called, I want to say procurement. That's not the right word. I'll think of it in a second. But your water rights, you lose the amount you don't use. And so, oh, sorry, I thought so because of that, if you were a business or an industry, you might be losing your water rights because you're using water more efficiently. Well, the government understands that that doesn't make sense for a city that's growing. If you get enough water rights for the future, then if you plan for the future, you could lose it. And so the Department of Health has said you aren't relinquishment. Sorry, relinquishment is the term for when you lose your water rights. So if you are a city and you have enough water rights for the future and to continue growing, then the Department of Health says, you're not going to relinquish, we're not going to take your water rights from you, but you need to give us something in return. You need to show us how you're going to use water efficiently and how you're going to use the public's water really, and use it the best way you can. So Department of Health requires that you have, as a system, you have water use efficiency goals and measures. And you have to set them every time you do a water system plan. So the goals and measures are established every 10 years with the plan. There are required elements and chosen elements that you do, and it has to be established through a public process. So water use efficiency doesn't necessarily delay any future projects, or it may delay them, but it doesn't get rid of your immediate concerns. So for your system, if you use water efficiently and you're using less and less water per person, it might push out a project, but it probably won't eliminate what you need to get done as soon as possible. Next slide. So in your last water system plan, your goal was to reduce single-family, multifamily residential, commercial, industrial connections by 25 gallons per day by December 31st, 2020. So that was your stated goal. The data available in the 2016 water system plan to see where you were at in 2016 is a bit limited, but the best we could tell, you've reduced approximately 11 gallons per day between 2016 and 2020. So not quite 25, but you don't necessarily know how things are going to go and how your efficiency measures are going to work. So you have dropped, next slide. That's not overly critical. There's no penalty. There's nothing that happens if you don't meet your goal. You just want to strive to keep doing the best you can. So working with Public Works on this water system plan, the goal was to reduce from 290 gallons per day per ERU or equivalent residential unit, which is basically a single family house, to 280. So dropping by 10 gallons per day over the next 10 years, which is a manageable number with room for continued reduction. If you beat that goal, great. If you don't meet it, then the next time around you set a goal that you think you can meet. So by the end of that 10-year period, this goal would save you approximately 47 million gallons of pumped water per year. So the goals are the what? What is the city trying to do? It's trying to meet a particular goal. The water use efficiency measures are how is the city going to do that? What are the things the city is going to do to help reduce water use? So as part of this planning effort, we talked with Department of Health because they had said that a lot of the measures that you had been doing all were pretty similar. Most of them were education based. And so they said they liked those measures, but they wanted to see a little bit more diversity this time around. So after we worked with them, we came up with a couple others that Public Works has decided they want to try. And what's key here is the city's free to add or change things along the way. There's no intent that this be like, okay, this is what you're doing for the next 10 years. They say, what are you going to try? And if you come up with a good idea along the way, by all means, start implementing it and see how it goes. The point is to strive for better and to reducing water use benefits everybody. If everybody's using less water, you can serve more people without things like new wells. We just want to be good stewards of the things that we have. So the measures at this point that we have proposed are, so school outreach at the 3rd grade level is something you've been doing that seems to work well. Periodic water bill brochures. So when you get your water bill, having something that's a rolling average that shows how much water you've used over the last 12 months. Typically, if someone sees a higher month compared to the next, it does help them to think, what did I do this month? Oh, that's right. I watered my lawn more, whatever it is. It helps people connect what their bill and how much water they're using so that it can help them on an individual basis decide that they want to conserve water. An additional piece of this is that the city provides supplemental information to renters who don't receive water bills. In some situations, if the bill isn't being paid by the person who's actually living there, they might not actually see that connection there. There are water conservation information and tips in the newspaper biannually, in the fall and in the spring, a newspaper article. And then SVID irrigation information. So this is one of the new ones that Department of Health had, excuse me. Department of Health had asked how many of the citizens are actually connected to SVID for their irrigation water. And that wasn't information that we could get out of them, but in the process of that discussion, it was determined that it would be useful for your water system to have SVID serving the irrigation demands, because like a lot of cities, in the summer, your water use goes way up because people are irrigating their lawns, businesses are irrigating, using potable water instead of irrigation water. And unfortunately, for many citizens, the connection to SVID for an existing property does come at a cost. But if an individual user does want to make that connection, the city would help make that communication occur to help people at least find out what it would take to get connected and make that determination for whether they wanted to do that. And then the goal would be for new developments that SVID be used when it's available, because at my understanding, that's a lot easier process to get connected to a new connection as opposed to an existing. And then water savings infrastructure, having public works staff at booths at events have the ability to hand out things like low flow shower heads and other things that can be installed at individual properties to reduce water use at that level. And so at this point, if there are any questions, I will try to answer them.
Council members, questions or comments? Yes, sir.
So Jackie, if we can go back to page 61 with rate impact. I think that's what most concerning for the residents is gonna be is the rate increases going forward. The way you got to this number of $78.11, you increased it by 10% year over year.
It was, I believe it was 10% year over year for 3 or 4 years, and then it was 5% after that.
Okay, is this doing this alone? Is it gonna cover those projects?
Yeah, so if I can find out of the water system plan, there is one of the line items in its table 9.3. There is a line item dedicated to new DWSRF debt service. And so in 2034, for instance, that debt service for all the projects to that point was approximately $1.27 million. And the line item for increased rates at that point is well over $2 million because of other capital projects that are being taken on. And so right now, your water sales were about $2.7 million last year. And so by approximately doubling your water rate, you're approximately doubling your income over that period of time. But the critical piece is to continue to look on a year-by-year basis as to what your expenses are doing, because a big piece of planning for the future is what the inflation in those categories is. So it's something that if we take a look 10 years in the future, we're saying you need to be at that point. But things like city growth, additional connections, things like that do have a substantial impact on just what you're bringing in as far as revenue.
So I know on average, if you build a new house, it costs you about $6,000 to connect to the system. Is that correct, Ron?
Yeah, around there, because you're gonna have your meter connection and your equity fees, so it could be around, around there.
So are we
7.
taking in consideration those fees that the city's gonna be receiving and not just the extra burden on the current residents?
Well, the fee schedule would have to be adjusted according to finance as you go every year. So that would change depending on how the city decides to change that fee schedule.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm trying to understand, like, there's 3 projects listed on there. New well rehab, application for the new reservoir. Those are stuff that we're gonna need because we're gonna have more homes in Sunnyside. And I just don't see how it's fair for the current residents to pay for those fees. I think maybe it should be, for the new homes to pay for that, for that service going forward. I mean, I would understand for any of the repairs that we currently have, for the increases to happen, but 10% each year, so it's quite a bit. And especially if it's to cover the whole projects.
I agree. I mean, a rate increase year over year like this is fairly substantial. One aspect of this is that the city's current water rate is fairly low compared to the national average. And so one way to look at this would also be that you may be due for rate increases anyway, so that you could have along the way potentially have been building up reserves for projects. And doing it now does at sometimes feel like it's a lot. And that's one of the reasons why we identified not trying to do a substantial rate increase and then flatten out and trying to do it over time. But I mean, I agree with you. I mean, it is a substantial impact and something that needs to be considered. As far as the connection fees are concerned, that is something that as a system is, once a city has its finances established for something, if you had that money in the bank, that would be great. As you get connection fees, setting those aside for future projects, that is, like you say, sort of the intent of them is growth pays for growth. And so, moving forward, those connection fees would probably be able to offset some of these capital costs, potentially for things like city matches on any kind of debt service that you get.
Well, I would say that, unless somebody else has any.
I think Ms. Hart has a question, so let's get her a chance to get in there.
Right. The big piece of this is that we can do this increase. We don't have to say tomorrow your rate's going to go up XYZ. We can do this over a period of time. Is that not true?
Yes, so the intent would then be, like I've mentioned, if you were to, for instance, apply to the DWSRF program in a couple months and say, this is the program we want, this is the project we want to do with that money. You might look at what your rate increase might need to be able to handle the debt service associated with that. That alone with maybe the other projects down the line, you may or may not be as concerned about, but you say, we're applying for this debt, which is going to end up being, say, whatever the number was, $600,000 a year. And so then you say, okay, at the end of this year, you're looking at your budgeting, you say, can we afford today to start paying that loan? You say, well, no, we would need our rates to be at this point. Say, okay, so let's look at the rate increases to get to that point. So that when you actually do that work and you start paying back the loan, you already have a rate structure in place that can support it. Then maybe a couple years down the line, you say, here's our next program we want to do. This is what the debt services, can our rates support it? Along the way, as long as you're doing those check-ins, you can make sure you keep on top of the rates. The concern and something that happens in a lot of cities is you say, that was a big project, we got that taken care of, we don't want to do anything for a while, and you let your rates stay stagnant. Then the next time you have to do a project, you say, well, geez, now we have to do like a 30-40% increase to pay for this huge project instead of working towards it. And so that's where something like this planning document identifies, this is something that it's a big increase, but if you do it over time, it may feel more manageable. Or there are some cities that say, the citizens don't want to see a rate increase every year. We're going to do this much, knock it all out at once. But I mean, there's definitely a downside to that too. I mean, a huge rate increase all up front, that's going to feel like people can't plan for that. And so that's sort of the thinking behind the stepped approach in the plan.
It seems like that's what we've done in the past and it works out a little bit better. Although in the past, we've also done the stagnant and then all at once had a huge increase. I think being able to do it over a period of time is a much better approach. So
I would like to tell you that you don't have to do anything with your wells for a couple of years, so you could start stepping up now. But I mean, realistically, we'd like to see those well rehabs happen as soon as possible. And so that's where the concern with saying you need to do something right away happens.
Right.
So
that's where we're at.
I would say that your best case would be to get those wells 6 and 7. When I've talked with city staff, that they just say like, we need those wells back. And so I would recommend you get on that, and this application November is the best, fastest avenue to do that.
So then you're talking, there's about 3 different numbers up there where the single family residence water rate. So are we looking at the average of $36.19?
Yes, so the way that works is the city's the way your water bills are calculated is you have a base rate of $19.55 per month. And when you pay that rate, if you use up to 2,300 gallons per month, that's all your water bill is. For any usage beyond that amount, you pay an incremental cost. So, but backing out the numbers of what average water use is through your city, it averages out to about 36.19 per customer.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Jack, if you go to page 49. Yeah, that one. So 2023, it says 3,071 single family resident connections and then total 5,559. The difference is that the commercial and the business?
Let me see the slide you're talking about.
49 planning projects, projections.
This is why we do the dry run first.
And even then, it doesn't always work, does it?
On the other one, if you could scroll down on that.
I think the third page.
Oh. On the keyboard, there's a page. Nothing.
Just decide to freeze on you.
You're talking about one of those tables that shows the numbers of
No,
ERUs.
it's not a table. It just says, 2023 population, 17,378, and then 3,071 single family residential connections. Total 5,559.
Then yeah, that would be the commercial, industrial, and dedicated irrigation connections.
And then right below it, 2043, it's just like a projection, right? 4,563 single family residents, 8,260 total connections. So if,
Are those projected?
yeah, those are the projected. So there's a difference. You guys are projecting 1,492 new residential connections and 1,209 business commercial. So if you grab those and you multiply it by the 6,000, connection fee, that equals out to about $17 million of potential income from the connection fees. Wouldn't that help? Like going back to what I was saying,
Absolutely.
to reduce the actual cost that the current residents pay?
Yes, and the short answer is yes. If you were collecting connection fees on all of those as they came in the door, you would be able to address some of those projects down the road with those connections.
Okay.
The issue with this is that what you're looking at there is 20 years from now. And so you're not going to see all of that until you've already done some of these major improvements that are realistically needed in the next 5 years. That being said, you may be able to lessen the impact of rate increases, knowing that some of those fees are coming, assuming that you grow at this kind of rate. So there is, I mean, obviously we understand there's some concerns with trying to assume future connections will pay for projects, but I do understand what you're saying, and that is true, that the connection fees would help to be able to offset the costs.
Because you list on there, the 20-year loans or whatever, couldn't, the city get those loans and then as the connection fees come in, then you pay them off, right? In theory.
There is danger in using one-time connection fees to pay for annual payments. That being said, yes, I get what you're saying, and there are other projects that need to be done through city reserves that you probably would be using those kinds of fees to help pay for.
Okay. And one more additional question. I have a lot of questions, but these projects, they total 20.5 million, but then on a different page, you say that we need 47 million. So
that is all the other projects
the
combined.
smaller ones.
Yeah.
Combined equals to another 20 million.
Approximately over the 20-year period.
Okay.
Mr. Bueller.
On these immediate priorities, the last one is the reservoir. How important is that? How far can we push that back? And where are we at, Arna? Do we have property to put it? Do we know where it's gonna go? Or are we just in the, we need one stage?
My understanding is that there's a tentative understanding of where that would be, up on the hill. Where I've always heard people call it the Superman Tower, it has the Superman logo on it. So up in that area, it's my understanding of where that ideally that reservoir would be located. By placing it on the south side of the system, it would help growth in that area. That being said, that's not the only location. And my understanding also is that we don't have the property at this time, so that would have to be identified. As far as whether it can be pushed out, right now, you aren't in a situation where you don't have enough. You're not in a situation where you don't have enough storage to operate. There's just reliability considerations that you don't want to be in a situation where you have to be operating your pumps 24 hours a day, 365 days a year to keep up. You want some buffer in your system, which is part of what reservoirs are for. Department of Health has a couple reliability recommendations. One of them is that after you do have a fire, that you be able to replenish that fire suppression storage within, I believe it's 2 days while running at maximum day demand. Right now, you're basically there. So, and actually, with that water rights consideration where you're not supposed to be pumping more than 5,000 gallons per minute, you actually don't meet that reliability. That being said, if you were to have a fire and you pumped 24/7, you would refill your tanks. It's just would you do it in 2 days? Would you do it with only 18 hours of pumping? That's another thing in a different spot. They recommend you only have to pump 18 hours a day because you don't want in a situation where you're pumping 24/7 and you're keeping up, but you're not refilling the tank. You have another fire and you don't have the water there. And so right now, you're basically at a point where you can operate your system and you don't have any huge concerns aside from the fact that sometimes you might want to use a well that has some, has some odor concerns or some taste. But if you push projects like that out, you are at risk of getting to a situation where you have a fire and then you can't keep up. So you're kind of at that edge right now. It's not like your wells where you can't operate your system effectively without it. It's more of a plan for the future, plan to make sure you're not taxing all of your things right up to the level. Which is why it's the project that's 3 years out as opposed to the wells, which we're saying to jump on as soon as you can.
All right. Other questions? I know Deputy Mayor's had quite a few here. We need to be conscious of our time as well. We've got keep an eye on that. So go ahead, sir.
So talking about conservation of water, I went on the fee schedule, right? And if you spend between 23 to 90 gallons, it's 27 cents per gallon. But the more you use, the rate goes down per gallon. Does that make sense to?
There are different types of rate structure. What you have is called a declining block rate, where water gets less expensive the more you use. There's another rate structure called an inclining block rate, where water gets more expensive. There's a flat rate, which some communities have, where it's just, it's what it sounds like. The water costs the same per gallon. So one of the things that Department of Health asks us to do with water use efficiency is to consider implementing an inclining block rate to make water more expensive the more you use. That is something that we recommend in the plan, that you do a more involved rate study, especially after you get past these well projects, to kind of take a step back and say, what do we want to do with our rates? Would we consider implementing something like that? The danger that some communities find with an inclining block rate is that since you're relying on a lot of your income from that additional, if people were to start using less water, which is great, you want to be using less water, all of a sudden you aren't receiving back as much in revenue. So when you use an inclining block rate, it can be difficult to budget and make sure you're not going to suddenly have lower revenue than you expected.
Got it.
All right, thank you very much. And I'm sure there's a very real possibility of more questions in the regular meeting as well after the public hearing. So I suppose you should probably be prepared for that as well.
Well, I'm counting on it.
This is, as you've noticed, council has been very interested in this and studying this particular document It's a long document, but if you skip out all the appendices and extra parts there, it's manageable. So
I do say, I appreciate that. Trying to work on a plan for a council that doesn't actually read it can be frustrating. So I do appreciate that you actually are engaged with this process. So.
well, thank you very much for your presentation. We look forward to hearing from you in the regular meeting as well. All right, council, there's one more thing that I want to include on here. It's not listed on our agenda. In our last meeting, we passed an ordinance and it was on the original agenda for a public hearing and discussion. And that was taken off, and it was taken off for a reason. One of the things that council is able to do the first meeting after a vote is to bring it back for reconsideration. This is not something that I want to stop talking about, but rather I want council to have some time to discuss this particular ordinance and deliberate on that a little bit. So I'm going to, during the regular meeting, bring it back for reconsideration so that we can discuss that ordinance and come to a better understanding of it. Okay, its intention is not to get rid of any type of ordinance of this type, but we need to be able to talk about it. And so I think we need to do that before we bring it up for public comment in a public hearing. So it's not going to be thrown away. It will definitely be on our agenda this evening. So please be aware of that.
Question.
Yes.
Then why did it go away altogether? Why isn't it on the agenda if we're gonna be discussing on the item?
Because bringing it back for reconsideration, we are discussing the merits of the resolution as opposed to moving on with the resolution. So there's an opportunity that it can be modified, or it can be repealed, or it can be accepted the way it was. But this gives council an opportunity to debate, because during the last meeting, there was no opportunity for council to discuss or ask questions. So I want to make sure that council has the opportunity to do that. I think that's due diligence for council, and I believe it's due diligence for the public.
So are you suspending the rules to?
No,
be
it's
able to
not
put it on
suspending the rules.
on the active agenda?
No, well, no, and I can do this in two different ways, and I want to bring that up to council. I can do that during the time of comments from council members, or I can do that and we can add that to the agenda if there's no objection from council. I can put that in the agenda as item D, and we can just put it right after the water. Or actually, it won't be item D, it'll be item E, I think. Yeah. We can do that after the water discussion. We can add that to the agenda at this time, or we can do it during items from council members.
So the objective is just to discuss,
Correct.
not to vote,
We can,
to adopt.
there can be a motion to vote as well. So yeah, it can lead to a motion, it can lead to action, but to bring it back for discussion for council, because I do feel that that's valuable for council. This is a deliberative body. We should be able to deliberate. So. All right, so I know there was a feeling that perhaps I was dodging a bullet on that. No, I'm not. I'm bringing that one back. It's definitely going to happen. So, all right. So with no other business to come before us for this section of the meeting, we are adjourned at 6:17 until 6.